The truth is that most people spend a lifetime carrying the invisible weight of other people's opinions. From childhood, we learn to look outward before we look inward. We search for approval before we search for purpose. We try to fit into shapes that were never made for us. We silence our voice because we fear judgment, and we shrink our dreams because we wonder what others might say. This story begins with a young man named Aaron. For years, Aaron lived his life like a mirror, reflecting what others expected from him. Every time he wanted to make a decision, he asked himself the same questions. What will they think? Will they laugh at me? Will they reject me? Will they say I am not good enough? These questions followed him everywhere like shadows. They shaped his choices, controlled his voice, and locked him inside a life that was never his to begin with. One day, he stood in front of a bookstore window and stared at a novel he had always wanted to write something like. He dreamed of being an author for years. But he never started, not because he lacked talent, not because he lacked ideas, but because he was terrified that people would judge him. He imagined strangers criticizing his writing. He imagined friends calling his dream unrealistic. He imagined family members questioning why he would pursue something so uncertain. That fear kept him silent. But that afternoon, as he stared at the book, something shifted inside him. He realized that the world never stopped to think about him as much as he once believed. Everyone was too busy worrying about their own lives, their own fears, and their own insecurities. He understood something simple but powerful. People think far less about you than you imagine. He went home, took out a blank notebook, and wrote his first sentence. It was clumsy and uncertain, but it was real. It was his. For the first time in a long time, he created something without imagining an audience whispering behind him. The moment he started writing, he felt something he had forgotten existed. Freedom. Not the freedom of doing whatever he wanted, but the freedom of being who he truly was before the world told him to hide. In the weeks that followed, Aaron noticed how deeply he had allowed the judgment of others to shape his entire life. He avoided speaking up in meetings because he worried that people would think his ideas were foolish. He wore clothes he did not like because he wanted to blend in. He kept friendships that drained him because he feared being alone. He stayed in a job that brought him no joy because that job had a socially acceptable label. He began to ask himself a different question. What if I live for myself instead of others? At first, this new mindset felt uncomfortable. When you spend years pleasing people, choosing yourself feels like rebellion. But slowly, he learned a valuable truth. The moment you stop caring about what people think, you start caring about who you truly are. He started making small but meaningful changes. When he had an idea in a meeting, he spoke up. His voice trembled the first few times, but he kept going. When something felt wrong, he said no, even when no felt difficult. He stopped apologizing for existing. He stopped explaining himself to people who were not willing to listen. He began to wear clothes that reflected his personality. He chose hobbies that brought him joy. He protected his time, his energy, and his dreams. The more he stepped into his real self, the more he noticed something surprising. People respected him more when he did not try to impress them. They listened when he spoke with conviction. They admired his courage when he followed his own path. The opinions he feared so much had no real power. He was the one giving them power. One night, while writing the latest chapter of his novel, he reflected on how many years he had wasted worrying about opinions that did not matter. He realized that most people's judgments are temporary. They forget quickly. Their criticism says more about their own fears than about your actions. Some people judge because they are insecure. Some judge because they are unhappy. Some judge because they cannot understand anyone who lives differently from them. But none of these reasons should shape the life you live. He learned that the only voices that deserve space in your mind are the voices that lift you higher. The voices that encourage you to grow, the voices that want you to succeed. Everyone else is simply background noise. Aaron finished his novel a year later. He held the printed pages in his hands and cried, not because the book was perfect, but because he finally did something he once believed he was not allowed to do. He published it himself. Some people loved it. Some people did not. But he no longer lived for their approval. He lived for the joy of creating something meaningful. As time passed, he began helping other people who still lived trapped by fear of judgment. He told them that the world belongs to those who are brave enough to show their true selves. He told them that you cannot control how people think, but you can control how you respond. He told them that confidence is not the absence of fear. Confidence is the decision to act despite fear. He reminded them that no matter what you do, people will always talk. If you fail, they talk. If you win, they talk. If you stay silent, they talk. If you succeed loudly, they talk. So you might as well live in a way that makes you proud. The truth is simple. Life opens up the moment you stop trying to be acceptable and start trying to be authentic. When you stop caring what people think, you reclaim your voice, your choices, and your power. You begin to notice possibilities you once ignored. You learn to trust your instincts. You learn to protect your dreams. You learn to love the version of yourself that had been waiting quietly inside, hoping for a chance to breathe. This is the message Aaron shares with anyone who feels stuck. Your life is yours, not your neighbor's, not your classmates, not your family members who cannot see your vision. Not the strangers online who comment without understanding your story. Not the people who left, not the people who doubted, not the ones who never believed in you. Your life is yours. You do not need permission to live it. When you stop caring what people think, you begin to live with intention. You begin to live with purpose, and you begin to live with courage strong enough to shape a life that feels right, not a life that looks right. And that is where freedom truly begins. As Aaron continued growing into the person he was meant to become, he noticed another truth. Caring too much about what people think does not only hold you back, it silently shapes your identity until you no longer recognize yourself. Every time he had tried to please others, he erased a small part of his own identity. Every time he changed his words to avoid judgment, he distanced himself from his own truth. Every time he refused to take a risk because of another person's opinion, he rejected a version of himself that could have existed. He realized that caring too much about outside opinions is a slow and quiet form of self-abandonment. You abandon your ideas, your talents, your dreams, and your uniqueness in order to fit inside a world that was never designed for your potential. You allow other people's voices to become louder than your own. You allow their fears to shape your choices. You allow their doubts to shrink your courage. Over time, you lose sight of who you were before the world started telling you who you should be. Aaron promised himself that he would never live that way again. He committed to a new principle. If something brings meaning, joy, or purpose into his life, he will do it even if others do not understand. If something aligns with his values, he will follow it even if others disagree. If something helps him grow, he will pursue it even if others remain silent or critical. He decided to live according to inner truth rather than outer approval. With this mindset, he noticed changes in his relationships. The people who valued him for who he truly was grew closer. They encouraged him, supported his decisions, and celebrated his progress. The people who only liked the version of him that pleased them slowly drifted away. At first, this separation felt painful. But soon he understood that losing people who demand your silence is not a loss. It is liberation. You create space for connections built on honesty, respect, and authenticity. Aaron started to observe how different life became when he focused on growth instead of validation. Opportunities that once seemed distant began to appear. Ideas that he had pushed aside finally had room to expand. Confidence came naturally, not because he was perfect, but because he was no longer chaining himself to the expectations of others. When he spoke with clarity. When he acted with intention. When he dreamed boldly. He realized that the world responds differently when you are not afraid to be yourself. People trust those who walk with conviction. People listen to those who speak with sincerity. People are inspired by those who live with courage. And all of this becomes possible the moment you stop handing your power to opinions that shift like the wind. One evening, a friend asked him what changed. Why had he become so calm, so confident, so free? Aaron answered with a simple truth. I stopped living for others and started living for myself. I stopped waiting for permission that no one was ever going to give. I stopped letting fear choose my path. Life becomes much clearer when you stop asking how others might judge you and start asking whether you will be proud of yourself when the day ends. He explained that people often misunderstand what it means to stop caring what others think. It does not mean disrespect. It does not mean arrogance. It does not mean ignoring advice or refusing to listen. It means understanding that your voice should be the loudest voice in your life. It means recognizing that your worth does not depend on how many people approve of you. It means grounding your choices in truth instead of fear. Aaron encouraged his friend with a message that he had learned through his own transformation. You will never live fully if you are always trying to be acceptable. You will never become extraordinary by trying to be ordinary. You will never find your purpose by chasing popularity. The world needs the real you, not the edited version that tries to satisfy everyone. As he continued speaking, he shared one final insight that had changed everything for him. The fear of judgment does not disappear when you gain confidence. It disappears when you understand that judgment cannot stop you unless you allow it to. Opinions cannot block you. Criticism cannot break you. Doubt cannot define you. The only thing that can hold you back is the belief that others know more about your path than you do. The next morning, Aaron woke with a deep sense of peace. He realized that his life was beginning to align with the person he had always hoped he could become. He no longer felt the weight of 1,000 imagined opinions pressing on his chest. He no longer felt trapped in a life built for others. He felt light, strong, and present. He sat by his window, watching the sunrise, and whispered a quiet promise to himself. I will not let fear guide my life ever again. I will not shrink to make others comfortable. I will not betray myself in exchange for approval. I will choose courage. I will choose authenticity. I will choose the life that makes my soul feel alive. In that moment, Aaron understood something essential. You do not stop caring what people think in one day. It is a practice. It is a decision you make over and over again. Every morning you remind yourself that your purpose is greater than their opinion. Every evening you remind yourself that your truth is stronger than their judgment. Every day you strengthen the belief that your life belongs to you, and slowly, one step at a time, you become the person you were always meant to be. You become a person who is guided by vision instead of fear. You become a person who lives with intention instead of hesitation. You become a person who knows that real freedom begins the moment you stop seeking approval and start seeking authenticity.